Let's look at more things we can do with functions. So I have a program here that I'm calling area of circle using functions improved. So let's look at why I'm calling this improved. While I was editing the video on just the area of the circle using a function, I realized that I had called this something like radius input by user, etc. Well, there are probably situations, or undoubtedly situations, where this radius didn't come from the user. So I thought, well, we should really just put the word radius here. And this would make it a obviously more general purpose function that would calculate the area of a circle given the single input of the radius of that circle. So I changed that, and if you'll notice down here, when we actually use this function, we call the function, we have the calculated area of the circle. This is going to be the variable that holds the result, and this is the function name, and in this case we're passing it radius input by user. Now this gets mapped onto radius, and then that's used inside the function, and it returns the area of the circle, and that is stored, of course, in this variable. So the only thing that's really changed between this and the original version is that I have put a more generic word, radius, here rather than radius input by user or whatever it was. And that reminds me, and it should remind you or make more plain to you, that we can use functions in several different situations. In this case, I just made this much more generic, the parameter here. The other thing I've added to this is, and this is called get positive float. And notice there's a parameter here, an argument. I call this argument sometimes. This is prompt. Okay? So let's see how we call that, and then we'll see what happens to after it's called. So here I've got a variable radius input by user, and I'm going to the program's going to assign the value to that variable that's obtained by calling the function get positive float and passing it the argument enter the radius of the circle. Now this here matches up, of course, to the prompt. So the real purpose of this function is to prompt the user for a float value. And further, it's going to make sure that a float value is input. And it's not going to return until it is a float value. So what we have here is an example of input validation. And this is very important. You may have noticed in some of your previous programs that if you entered, if your program is expecting an integer and you entered a float, it would crash your program. So that's not good. So you always want to make sure that you validate your inputs, and you only get the type of input that you want and your program is expecting. Otherwise, you know, your program might crash, and there's some pretty serious consequences past that. So let's see how this works. So this function gets past the prompt, and here's what happens with this. There's a while loop here, and it says just while true. Now remember, anytime you have a loop, there must be some way for the loop to terminate. Otherwise, it's an endless loop and it keeps on going forever, which is not what you want. So let's see how this loop could or can or does terminate. So we have a structure here called try and except. And this is actually covered in one of the further chapters of the book, which I think is kind of unfortunate because it's really nice to introduce this earlier, which I am right now. And there's more variations of this. What this says is we're going to try this. We're going to try to get a float input. And this prompt is the one that was passed to the function here. And then the input function is going to take whatever the user enters, which is of course a string, and turn it into a float, and then assign that to the variable value that's used inside the function. Now, if this works, we further do this test here. Now let's look at what happens if it doesn't work. If it doesn't work, the except clause here is executed. In this case, it's a value error. So this value error section is executed if the try block, or this condition here, is false. So if the user does not input something that can be converted into a float, this gets executed. And it simply prints out invalid input. Please enter a number. So we go back up and run the loop again. Prompt for another input, try to convert it into a float, and if it's successful, then this if then else is executed. Now, not only are we testing to make sure that the user inputs something that can be converted to a float, we're also making sure here that the input is positive by checking if the value here, the value stored in value, if you will, is positive. If so, the function returns whatever's in value. And that's what breaks the loop. Else, print, please enter a positive number, and that makes the loop repeat again. And it will keep on repeating until the user input can be converted into a float value. So this is the kind of thing, if you're accepting user input, and there's another one you can do for integers, and there's other ones still. This is the kind of thing you should include in all of your programs that accept user input. You need to check to make sure that it's the proper type to work in the rest of your program, and if necessary, you should check for the limits of the value itself. In this case, we're figuring an area of a circle. It wouldn't make any sense here to enter a negative number, so we're going to check for that. So this is all just really good practice, and that's why I went on and introduced it right now, although this is covered in much more detail in a further chapter. So let's run this real quick and I'll show you how it works. We run, here we are right here. Here's a welcome statement, and then this here is executed. So we call the function that we just discussed, enter positive float, and send it the argument, enter the radius of a circle. Now this is going to be used as the prompt, and there it is, printed out. So now we're up here, and it's expecting us to enter a float value. So let's enter a float value. I'll enter 12 and I'll press enter, and this is a number that can be treated as a float. It's also an integer, but it's also a float, and it's greater than 0, so the 12 is returned here and saved in this variable, radius input by user, and then we go down to this statement and we call the other function, calculate area of a circle, and send it the argument radius input by user, which is what we just stored in this variable here. And now we're up here, up right here, and the value we sent over is mapped onto radius and is used in this calculation, and it returns area of circle, and that is assigned to this variable, and then we have a final print statement to verify that it worked. Now let's run this and put in something besides an input that can be converted into a float. Let's go 12a, press enter. Notice we get an output here, invalid input, please enter a number. So this is what's happened here. 12a could not be converted into a float, so this is executed and it simply prints out invalid input, please enter a number. There's other things you could do here, but this is what suits our purposes right now. And we loop again. So see, now we're back up to the prompt right here. And if we do ABD, same thing happens. We can't, Python cannot convert this into a float. So this fails, this is run, and we get this statement, and the loop continues. And now let's put in 32. Now this time 32 can be converted into a float and the program continues to run. Now just to make sure here, the radius of a circle 23.4. Now that truly is a float, and see, it works just fine. And I'll have more to say with the whole idea of how to test a program in another video.